Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on another 109-degree heat advisory night to the cool place of the Poison Pen. We have two authors here from Seattle who are trying not to die right in front of us due to the temperature change. Robert Dugoni and a longtime friend who I'm delighted to say is coming back into publishing again, Bryan Gruley. So guys, welcome. So Bob's in blue and Bryan is in light blue. Right. Here you are.
Thank you.
Here you are.
So this was a little bit of a surprise to, I think, both Bryan and I when Barb said, "You guys talk to each other."
You just got
Hi, Bob.
I've spoiled you.
But yeah, no, thank you for coming out on, I think it was 113 when I touched down, which was more than 50 degrees hotter than it was in Seattle. When I got on the plane, everyone was wondering, why am I wearing shorts and flip-flops? So it's like, I'm going to Phoenix.
I'm from Chicago, actually. I live there now. And last weekend, it was like 50s and rainy. Old man winter still doesn't want to leave. So
Oh, poor you.
I was delighted. Delighted to be here. Delighted.
So Bryan and I first met, probably 6-7 years ago?
Yeah.
And we were staying at, what is the Frank Lloyd Wright Hotel?
The Biltmore.
The Biltmore.
That's right.
And we came down here to Barb's and we did a signing together. And was that for Starvation Lake?
No, I think it was for either Hanging Tree or Skeleton Box.
So we had a friend in common, and we talked Notre Dame hockey. I think for the better part of the night.
I went to Notre Dame and I still play hockey. I didn't play Notre Dame hockey. I wasn't good enough. But I'm still playing.
We also realized that we're natural rivals because I went to Stanford. So, the Stanford-Notre Dame rivalry, football rivalry, is a biggie. But
there's no hockey rivalry.
no, there's not.
We crushed it. I just wanted to get that out of the way.
But so I've known Bryan for a long time, and he and I had a conversation in New York. He had a new book coming out called Bleak Harbor, and he asked me if I would read it, and I said sure, I'd be happy to. And I forget the exact quote about the characters that I gave you.
A fascinating calamity of flawed characters. That's pretty cool.
It really is. It's one of those books that you start reading and you're not sure who you're necessarily supposed to like, because everybody's got a flaw, which makes them extremely real. And so the whole time you're going through this, you're wondering, because it's a terrific mystery as to what happened. How did this all come about? And so you're trying to put the pieces into the puzzle, right? You're trying to put the pieces in the puzzle to see how this is all going to fit. So, one of the things I had as a writer, I was really fascinated by how did you put together the plot, and without giving anything away, so that when we get to the end, you go, oh, yeah, that all fits together.
I wish I knew. I had an idea. The book is about the kidnapping of an autistic boy. He's 15 years old, about to turn 16. And I had a vague idea how it would end. And I started at the beginning, and I did a lot of rewrites. And in the edit, this was after our friends from Thompson Mercer bought the book. But still, it wasn't exactly right. And I don't really outline, but I have these files, so I'm writing the book, and I have a file I call Later. And it's like balls that are in the air, and I go, okay, I got to deal with this later. I want to think about it now because I can't deal with it right now,
right.
But I don't want to forget it. So I have this Word file that's called Later, and I put it all in there, and then the beauty is you can go back and fix it. Yeah. And I love rewriting. I write nonfiction as well, or fake news, and then really fake news. And I love to rewrite. It's hard, but I know it's getting better. And then I'm I'm like, well, that couldn't have happened then. You have to either move it up or move it back or get it out. And frequently the answer is to just get rid of it.
Do you think it's the journalist in you that that has that love of the rewriting? I was a journalist as well, and I have absolutely no problem with Thomas and Mercer editing my book, giving me instructions, changing it, because it's part of the writing process. But yeah, I do know a lot of writers that they will literally say, "Do not touch my words," but I've never felt that way.
Well, I've been a journalist for 39 years, going on almost 39 years. So you get thick skin.
Yeah.
Because whoever you're writing for, it's their paper. From the Brighton Argus, where I first started, to the Wall Street Journal, and now I write for Business Week magazine. It's their magazine, it's their newspaper, and they'll work with you, but you tell them not to touch your words, they'll just laugh in your face. We're paying you, we'll tell you, but you want to make it better, we'll let you make it better. And you just learn how to do that. And what I've always found is really smart editors, and I had a fantastic editor for Bleak Harbor, Caitlin Alexander. They'll help you. And in the end, it's your work. You're the one who makes those decisions. And I have this weird thing where so when I edit, I go from electronic, then back to print, and I'll print stuff out. And I love the physical, the tactful feeling of striking out words, striking out whole paragraphs, because I know it's probably getting better.
Yeah. I have a law school roommate who has a son who's autistic, and so I was really fascinated with the whole idea of an autistic character. How did you come up with the idea, and how did you research it? Because I don't know autism that well, but I know from my friend, I know his son, and it read very real to me.
First of all, thank you for asking. Unlike my other 3 books, where I know exactly how I started, what idea I had, I don't really remember how I came up with this idea. There was a process where I had a totally different book in mind, and I was talking to this editor, this big shot editor from a big publishing house, and she said, "No, don't do that. Get out of your comfort zone." And so I made this boy autistic. Research-wise, I read a lot of stories. I read some of Steve Silberman's book on autism. And what I kept running into is people, they don't really understand it. There's all these different camps that argue about what it is and what it might be and what might cause it and how to deal with it. And in the end, I just thought, I'm just going to write a character. And his name is Danny. And even his mother says autism, it's just a label.
Yeah.
This is my boy, and he's not like anybody else in the whole world. As it turns out, my daughter, Caitlin, had a boy. This was 2 years after I had started, or a year and a half after I'd started Bleak Harbor. And Sawyer is probably on the spectrum. And so it's certainly Danny's not modeled on Sawyer. Sawyer is an angel. Danny is a little shit. As you'll find out when you read the book. But I'm certain that influenced me to some degree.
Yeah.
So, but you know what I thought of, Bob, was years ago, even before I was published, I was at this book conference in Milwaukee area. The Jordans, Ruth and John, hosted us, and Dennis Lehane was there. And he had just published The Given Day, which the prologue of that book is about Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth on one of their barnstorming tours in the winter back in 1918 or 19 or whenever. And I asked Dennis if he did a lot of research for that, and he said no. He said, I thought I knew enough about Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth. I just wanted to get the feel of their characters right. And then he went back and he did a little research to make sure, he didn't embarrass himself.
Right.
For instance, Babe Ruth didn't have a huge gut when he was doing those tours. He was like this lean, mean hitting machine. So anyway,
So ideas for books are always interesting, where they come from, and I'll share a little story with you. So I was, I'm on the 6th Tracy Crosswhite novel, right? And I needed to come up with another idea. And Tracy is it's a series. It's not like the Jack Reacher series. It's not like the James Bond series where the book always opens and he's in the exact same place he was in every book. He's single. He has no attachments. He's in some exotic city. Jack Reacher, he's in some different city in the United States, and then things happen, and a woman is usually involved, and then they have a relationship, and then something happens to the woman, and you start all over again. Tracy progresses, and she's continuing to progress. She has a boyfriend, the boyfriend becomes a husband, and boom, 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 boom. So I know where the characters are going, but I didn't have an idea to plug in, and true story. So I'm going down to visit my mom. And my mom doesn't like to drive to the airport anymore. She's 85, and the airport makes her nervous. So she'll always say, can you get this, Mom? It's okay. I'll have to get an Uber. So I got in an Uber, and I'm heading to my mom's office from the airport. And there's a guy in the front seat, and he looks Middle Eastern, and so I ended up asking where he's from. He actually said, "Well, I'm from India." I said, "Oh, okay." And we started chatting, and he said, "Yeah, I just recently got married." And I said, "Oh, congratulations. Have you known your wife for a long time?" He says, "Well, no, not actually." I said, "What do you mean?" And then it started dawning on me, and he said, it was an arranged marriage. And I was, the antennas go up in your head, right? It's like, okay, this is different. And I said, "So what does that mean? Did you date?" No, I met her, and then I met her again with parents present, and then we got married. And I said, "Were you terrified?" I mean,
hell, I was terrified, and I wasn't arranged.
Since this is being video recorded, I was not terrified, honey. I loved every moment of it.
Well, I know you were terrified, Derek.
But so I started talking to him, and I said, were you terrified? And he said, "No, because my parents have been married for 35 years, and they got married in India, and it was an arranged marriage." And he said, you know that arranged marriages have a much lower divorce rate than traditional Western marriages. And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, Western marriages are in the 50s, divorces, and traditional arranged marriages are far lower than that, usually 20. So I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute here. So I got out of the cab, literally, went in my mom's office, and she has this little space for me with a computer, and she said, are you? I said, "No, I'm good, Ma. We don't need to go home yet. I'm going to get on the computer." And I started doing research on arranged marriages. And a lot of what he had said was true, but it also had a lot to do with the culture. You don't get divorced in arranged marriages. I mean, it's kind of like you live with it. And you raise a family, and you have a purpose beyond love, and the purpose is to raise a family, and ding. And so I started researching it, and I was really just fascinated by the whole thing, because what I also started finding was that as the culture has progressed in the United States, as you have more generational, people move over from India, and then they have kids, and then the kids grow up American, there's a lot more resistance to the idea. And that was all I needed. And that's what I came up with was, a young girl whose parents are pressuring her to get married. She doesn't want to do it. She's a college student. She's trying to go to medical school. And she's resistant, and suddenly she disappears. And they don't know if she's just...
And her best friend has succumbed
to the pressure.
Which is a great dynamic.
Has she just left? Is she angry? Or is something nefarious happened to her? So, I mean, it's interesting where ideas for books come from. And I think that's one of the things as a writer that you always got to be open to. Is what is happening in the society now?
I'm really curious as a writer and a reader. Where did the idea for Tracy Crosswhite come up in the very first place?
Well, it was an idea of necessity because I had been told by my publisher in New York at the time that David Sloan's not selling the way we would like, so we don't want to publish him anymore. And it's one of those conversations where you want to say, well, yeah, because you're not promoting it at all. But you learn.
Put it on the shelf.
Yeah. You learn to kind of, I said I did an event last night for The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell, and what I talked to the audience about, what I said was, when you find a publisher that believes in you and believes in your work, that's when you know you're in the right place. And there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than knowing that you have a publisher behind you that has your back. And they did not have my back. Whether they liked the books or not liked the books, I knew they didn't have my back. So what are you going to do? You going to argue about it? No. You say,
business.
Oh, thank you, and you move on. But I was very upbeat about it until I got back to my hotel room in New York City with my buddies Jeff and Brian, and I started doing my George Costanza routine from Seinfeld. I was doing things like, I like sports. Maybe I could be a sports announcer. Well, you kind of have to have played sports in order to do that. And so I called my agent, Meg Gruley, our agent.
Our agent.
And Meg was very sympathetic about it. She said, "Get over it. Come up with a new character." Literally. So
I can hear that.
Yeah. So I went home and I started going through the David Sloan novels. I started, is there somebody I could spin off? And there's a great character named Kensington Rowe, and he's an ex 1-year NFL football player. He's got a bad hip. He eats aspirin like it's candy because he's in so much pain, but he doesn't want to get the hip surgery because he's afraid. And had this great character, and I called up Meg and I said, I got this great character, Kensington Rowe. And Meg said to me, what about his partner, Tracy Crosswhite? And I was like, what? What about his partner, Tracy Crosswhite? And I said, well, she's a chemistry teacher. She's a former chemistry teacher. Why was she a chemistry teacher? Now, this is a character I created, right?
Walter White was a chemistry teacher. That's a pretty good character.
And my response was, I don't know. And she said, well, figure it out.
Yeah. Well, you created her, so.
Yeah, and so that's how she came about. Was I figured it out, and then again, where do your ideas come from? Well, I'm sitting at home and I'm reading the newspaper, and they're taking down the dams on the rivers in Seattle to restore the natural habitat of the wild salmon. And when they take down these dams, the lake that they have formed up above to feed the hydroelectric plant goes away. And they started finding all this stuff. And I thought, what if they found a body? And that's all I needed.
Awesome.
And from there it went.
Sometimes you'll get ideas in the middle, and you don't even know you have an idea. For instance, in this book, there's a character, his name is Quartz. And that's all you know his name is. Quartz, like the rock, the multifaceted rock. And he's a fixer. But when I put him in, when I first wrote Quartz, I thought he's going to be in here for like 2 pages. He's with this seemingly more important character at that time named Pressman. And I just loved Quartz. Once he got on the page, I'm like, this guy's really interesting. So where did he come from? And how did he get here? So then I had to write another scene with him and Carrie, who is Danny's mother. And now I get in this scene, and he's in this Mexican restaurant in Valparaiso, Indiana. And I'm like, wow, this guy is cool. And so he just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until, like, one of Mark Haseki, another author, he goes, why don't you write the whole book about Quartz? I'm like, no, Haseki, I don't have another 5 years to rewrite the book. But and this, if you just, it's sort of a discipline. It doesn't sound like a discipline, but it's like, okay, I have this thing. I'm going to have enough discipline to let myself try it out.
So that's a question I had for you, because that could be a really scary thing for a writer, right? How long did it take you, to get to the point where you were confident enough to go, okay, this guy's in my head for a reason, and in my head at this moment in this book for a reason. I don't outline. I'm going to see where it goes. I mean, how long did it take
About
you?
3 years.
Yeah.
No.
No,
You know,
it's
I don't remember specifically.
But it's hard. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
And I do think, you're a journalist for 39 years. That's got to help. But
No.
it's hard to trust that instinct to say, I mean, because I don't outline either. And people will say to me, we were talking about this earlier. I'll get an email or a review or an Amazon or something, and somebody will say, I saw the ending of this book 5 pages in or 100 pages in. I'll go, where were you when I was writing it? Because I sure didn't see that ending.
Me either. And I didn't know what was going to happen to
Yeah.
Quartz. But I just figured, okay, he's part of it now. And I just start writing. And I'm writing the next book, which is set in the same town, Bleak Harbor. And I had the same thing happen to me. This guy's name is Harlan Fisher Jr., and I thought he was just going to be this one thing. And I wrote this whole chapter, and I liked him, but I'm like, that's not right. So I started taking notes I keep a journal, and I started thinking about the guy, and then it hooked into something else I was thinking about, and then something else, and now I just rewrote the whole chapter, and now he's significant. And I know I'm going to stay with him. I don't know what's going to happen to him. He's probably going to die. That happens. But maybe not. I don't know.
So I was a journalist too, and I honestly, being a journalist probably hurt me in terms of trying to write novels because I was arrogant, right? I thought, well, I can write. I wrote for the LA Times, but it's not the same thing. So how do you go from writing journalistically to writing fiction, or do you find it difficult?
Well, I did. I don't find it. They're different things and they're similar things. I mean, in the end, it's just story time. Get your attention and keep it. With journalism, you are limited. You are limited by the facts, the things, observation, documents, interviews.
You can just ignore those.
Yeah. Just make it up. It's hard to make stuff up. And so with journalism, you are. This is somewhat freeing that you're limited by. You pile up this big pile of clay, and then of documents and interviews, etc. And then you whittle it away, and what remains is the story. And so your choices are limited by the things that you've been able to discover. And that, in turn, was limited by how much time you had or how much space you have, how much patience your editors have. With fiction, the pile of clay is infinite. And you're influenced by everything you've ever seen or heard or listened to or eavesdropped on, and whatever research you do. And so some people think, well, that's great, you're free. Well, it's the burden of freedom. You have a million choices to make.
Yeah.
And in the end, in both cases, to me, it's just about throwing away the things that are boring or that don't keep the reader involved. What I do like, what's fun about fiction is somebody, red hair is not right, just change that. It's great.
Yeah.
And I can't do that.
So I mean, it's really terrifying, bordering on exhilarating. I mean, right? Don't you think?
It is. Yeah.
Because there are those days where you get to the office, and I mean, there are a lot of times where I get in there and I know this, and the story's just going, and I'll get up at 4 a.m. and I'll run into the I keep 2 offices. One is out of the home, and then one is in the home. And my wife made me keep the one out of the bedroom because I used to wake up at 4 a.m. and I'd turn the light on and I'd start scribbling notes. Now she's like, go in the other room. So I'd go in the other room and I'd start taking notes. But there are also those days where you get to the office and you go, which can be terrifying. And then all of a sudden you get that idea and it becomes really exhilarating. I go home and I say, guess what happened? Guess what did? Guess what's going on in the book? Guess what, all that kind of stuff. But again, I think it's something you gotta trust yourself.
You're just doing the work,
right?
Because, and you've heard this a million times about, people will say to me, I have a story. I think I can write a novel or a book or a story or whatever. And there's one rule of writing: button chair. You got to sit down and write it and do the work. Some days you have your fastball. Some days you don't. And like with this chapter I was writing with this character, I knew there was something not right. But the process of writing him, and he's interacting with another character that I know is part of the story, that helped me discover. So you have to be willing to throw stuff out. So I threw out a lot of words, but then, it's okay. Now I'm like, okay, I got this. And he's going to play an important role in the book.
So the Tracey books all take place in Seattle, which is where I live, where I'm from, and I go to all these places, and I look at them, and I research them, and I take photographs of apartment buildings where people live, and just so that I have it. And I think that's probably the journalist in me.
Mm-hmm.
So is Bleak Harbor a real place?
Bleak Harbor is loosely based on Saugatuck, Michigan. So if my first 3 books are set in Starvation Lake, which is a fictional town, but it's set about here. And it was based on a real town called Bel Air. It looks like Bel Air, but it has a lake on it called Starvation. And then so Saugatuck's down here, and this is Lake Michigan here, and so there are a whole bunch of little resort towns. Liz over there is from one of them, Grand Haven. There's Grand Haven, South Haven, Saugatuck, Union Pier, New Buffalo, St. Joe, and they're all cool places. A little touristy, but they're on this gorgeous lake, and there's restaurants and stuff. So, but Saugatuck's a little different than all of them because Saugatuck sits. The town is actually on a bay that's removed from the lake, and it surrounds this bay, and then there's a channel that goes out to the big lake, and then there's these beaches and dunes. The whole western side of Michigan is an amazing sprawl of dunes that go all the way up to like 400 feet over the lake, where Sleeping Bear Dunes is, a couple hours north of Saugatuck. So I've been to Saugatuck a couple times, and I thought, yeah, this is cool. I like the bay idea and the channel, and so originally Bleak Harbor was spelled with an E on the end of bleak, because I thought that's kind of obvious, just bleak. So I put an E on, and it's a town that was created by this pointy-nosed New Englander named Joseph Estes Bleak, originally with an E on the end. And he arrived in western Michigan in the 1860s and dug out a swamp.
Now, is this part real?
No.
This is made up.
Yeah.
As I say, this is in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book. Yeah, but there was a timber mill.
Okay.
So that's kind of, I hadn't thought of this, but there's like it's buried underneath Saugatuck, a timber mill. I'd forgotten all this. I actually did a story for the Wall Street Journal it was set in Saugatuck, about this billionaire, an oil and gas guy from Oklahoma City. He died a couple years ago, Aubrey McClendon. And he was trying to build this marina and all this stuff in the dunes, and he got in a fight with the environmentalists. And it's still not settled, even though he's dead. It's still going on. And I guess, and I heard about this timber mill that was buried, and I thought, well, these are these great industrial, the American industrialists. So I guess that's where that came from.
Do you have any restrictions on you because you're still a working journalist? I mean, do your editors, your publishers, whatever, do they ever get involved in terms of, what either the subject matter you write on or the areas that you write on? Or not really?
They've never. The first 3 books were written when the first 2 I was at the Wall Street Journal, and hell, they threw me parties. So they thought it was cool that I was a fiction writer. And at Bloomberg, which owns Business Week, they're agnostic.
Yeah.
Because I'm published by Amazon, or the next book, Bleak Harbor. I had to sign an agreement that I would not write stories about Amazon because that would be a conflict of interest, and that's fine with me. Actually, I have a story that's going to run in another month or so, and there is a passing mention of Amazon, but I'm okay with that. But I couldn't like write a profile of Jeff Bezos or write a story about their bookstores. I can't. It's a conflict of interest. So, I guess the simplest answer is no. I've never had any.
Segue into reading. We will say goodbye.